Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the United She Stands podcast. Today we have a guest, Liz Schmidt, and she is the executive committee co-chair of the Ohio Equal Rights Organization. Ohio Equal Rights is a nonpartisan grassroots organization led by citizens from Ohio. Their mission is to advance the well-being of Ohioans and strengthen the quality of life in the state of Ohio by promoting equity and civil rights via citizen-led ballot initiatives. And that's what you're going to hear about from Liz today. They are actively collecting signatures for two different ballot initiatives, the Right to Marry Amendment and the Ohio Equal Rights Amendment. So you'll get to hear all about those today. Work is for potentially 2026 ballot, but also it could be for 2027 ballot. So you'll hear why they're debating between a 2026 ballot or a 2027 ballot today from Liz. And we know you'll take so much away from this episode. Liz is very well informed on the issues surrounding this space in Ohio and also just on all of the work that has went into the policy behind these two amendments. So if you haven't signed these two petitions, we hope you listen through all the episode and then go find a place to sign. And if you have, we know you'll still learn something from today's episode with Liz. Enjoy.
Hi, Liz. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're so excited to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. We have been really looking forward to having this conversation with you all. Become quite a big fan of the podcast. So this is really exciting. And yeah, we appreciate your time.
Thank you. We appreciate your time, especially because you are on a bit of a trip and on a completely different time zone. So first off, if you could just set the scene for us. Ohio Equal Rights is pushing two constitutional amendments for the November ballot. So can you walk listeners through what each one does and why they both matter right now?
Absolutely. So I'm going to start with the Right to Marry, the Ohio Right to Marry Amendment, which will, when passed, remove Ohio's gay marriage ban that is currently sitting in our Constitution. And I think a lot of times the fact that we have a gay marriage ban in our Constitution isn't very visible because, of course, it's not in effect due to Obergefell v. Hodges, which protects same-sex marriage federally. Unfortunately, we are seeing what I think is going to be not necessarily the start, but an escalation of attacks on Obergefell v. Hodges. We've already seen Kim Davis try to bring a challenge to it at the federal Supreme Court. And so right now we're really faced with a situation where if a challenge to it is successful at any point, and there will continue to be challenges, we could actually go back to being a state that does not recognize gay marriage. Because if Obergefell v. Hodges were to be overturned, immediately the state law would kick back into effect, which is terrifying, and I think we were all very relieved that the Supreme Court declined to hear Kim Davis's more recent case, but we know looking at Roe versus Wade, it's not just going to be a one-off challenge, right? Roe was challenged for years, many times over, with a variety of arguments, and it only takes one challenge to undo the precedent. So we know that more challenges are coming. We hope that none of them will ever be successful, but we're just not at a point that we can guarantee that. So the Ohio Right to Marry Amendment would make sure that same-sex marriage is protected in Ohio, no matter what happens federally. It would guarantee that marriage licenses can't be denied based on the sex or based on the race of the people getting married. It's particularly important that the Ohio Right to Marry Amendment would guarantee that same-sex and interracial marriage is protected in the Constitution, because both Obergefell v. Hodges and the Loving case that protects interracial marriage are based on similar precedent, and were also deeply tied into precedent in Roe versus Wade. So there's already been talk among federal Supreme Court justices after Roe was overturned about coming for gay marriage next. Really, really important that we have that secured in our state. I know I am engaged right now, and my partner and I are really looking at, we want to be able to live in Ohio long term. And if our upcoming marriage, at some point you really just feel like you're already married when you've been together long enough. So sometimes I'm like, should I just call her my wife? Maybe. But at the point that we do have a legal marriage, right, we want that to be recognized. We're getting it for a reason. And There's so many families across the state who would be, you know, who would be plunged into uncertainty about their family's rights to be together and to have all the benefits that come from legal marriage, as well as quite a lot of people who probably will make the decision to go elsewhere. And, that's before I kind of dive into the Ohio Equal Rights Amendment. I think we often, there are a lot of right reasons to pursue equality. And one of the things that I really try to push for people is, even if you don't understand the experiences of LGBTQ people, or it's not really a priority, what happens to all of our communities, especially marginalized communities, affects the entire state economically, right? When people don't want to be in Ohio because they are afraid of being terrorized by their own government or having their families broken apart, that is going to show up in our population. People are already starting to leave. And that means that we lose out on funding that is tied to our population as a state. It also means that we are going to lose representation federally, right? The number of legislators we have is based on our population. So we could potentially lose seats in Congress if we have a steep enough population decline, outside of the fact that we are already struggling economically across the nation. And businesses want to be in places where they know their workers are going to be treated well, that are attractive to workers. And so, it's not just that it's the right thing to do, or that if you are an affected person, it's, just about your experience. This affects everybody, even if you think you're not affected. Right? Even if you don't know anybody and I don't think I know anyone who's never experienced some kind of feeling of being treated unfairly, or some kind of fear about the way that they're going to be treated because of their identity. These policies will get everyone one way or another. So we want to make sure that Ohio is a place that people want to live, that it's a place people want to do business, in addition to wanting to make sure that our families get to stay together. So that's the right to marry, and we segued a little bit. The Ohio Equal Rights Amendment, I am especially excited about. This is such a beautiful piece of policy, and there's so much heart that has gone into it. When passed, it will be the most comprehensive statewide non-discrimination policy in the country. And the way we put it together, we started looking at other ERAs, state level ERAs, as well as local non-discrimination ordinances in Ohio. So this ERA is based a lot off of the ERA that passed in 2022 in Nevada. But then we went around the state and we talked to partners, organizations, individuals. We spent over a year gathering feedback and asking people, we're going to put this massive effort into passing state and local non-discrimination policy. What needs to be in here to make sure that our communities are safe and our communities can thrive? And so that's how we got such a long and comprehensive list of characteristics. And I will be obnoxious and read them out because I am very proud of them.
Not obnoxious. They deserve to be heard to our audience.
Amazing. So the Ohio Equal Rights Amendment would protect Ohioans from discrimination both in state and local policy based off of their race, color, creed or religion, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, regardless of sex assigned at birth, pregnancy status, genetic information, disease status, age, disability, recovery status, familial status, ancestry, national origin, and military veteran status. So, what does that mean in practice? That's protecting LGBTQ people, but it's also protecting veterans. It's protecting people with disabilities, which already covers a third of Ohioans. 1 in 3 Ohioans has a diagnosed disability. So that category alone is protecting a third of the people in our state. It protects people with chronic illnesses. It protects people seeking reproductive health care. It protects people of color. It protects women. It protects immigrants. It protects the elderly. It protects religious people. It protects people who've experienced addiction. And it also protects the families of people who may come under discrimination because of their identity, even if their family members aren't. So if a child is in school and maybe that child isn't LGBTQ or that child was born in the United States, they might not fall into one of these categories automatically or face discrimination because they are of a particular identity. But if their parents are LGBTQ, if their parents are immigrants, there are absolutely unique barriers and potentially unique cases of discrimination that can come up against that child. So it protects not only people who often get targeted by the law, but also their families and loved ones by extension.
Yeah, I remember getting like the petition books for this and thinking like, this covers, I mean, I'm sure, I want to say everything. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there's a couple things that somebody could find that is like a whole, but like, it's so broad. It's so great. I think to your point, I know you said it would be the most comprehensive any state has. And it's easy to see that and believe that when you see the list of protections it offers.
Yeah. I'm really glad that comes across because it was done with a lot of love. I think we often find ourselves organizing out of fear or desperation or spite, but this is also, I'm here for spite, for the record. But this movement is also, it's been done with so much love for our families, for our communities, for each other. And we really, there's a long history of trans and LGBTQ people fighting fights and being at the forefront of fights for justice. And we know that our communities are so beautifully diverse, and just protecting someone in one way doesn't mean that we are protecting them as a whole being, right? Like we have to look at intersectionality, and we want to take everyone with us. Even if somebody's not part of the same community that our leadership is, we want everybody in the state to have the same kind of safety and ability to thrive that we're working for. So yeah, I'm so excited about the potential for the ERA to be expanding protections and rights in ways that we couldn't even conceive of when we started this.
Yeah, it would be so nice too for Ohio to be like a gold standard in something, like we don't get to lead the charge in a lot. So like this feels really good.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, like who's looking to Ohio for policy other than like deep red states?
I was gonna say
Yeah. Well, and it's, the thing is, people who are trying to restrict rights, they learn from each other. And that's why it's important that we learn from each other on the other side of that fight, right? Like we have to work together. Especially because most of the people in our movement are not people with deep pockets, right? We have almost, our donations are largely from small donors, and we're just regular people. So we didn't show up with big access to the law. We hired phenomenal lawyers. But when we crunched the numbers on what does it cost to have phenomenal lawyers, we were like, we have to do this, but oof. Right.
Yeah.
And so this is, it's fully people powered, and we've been very lucky to be able to learn from people in other states and also other people in Ohio who've been wonderful partners.
Yeah. Okay, we are going to move on in a second, but I want to make just one more comment. When you were talking about the right to marry amendment, I got like so mad for you because I appreciate your appeal to like, hey, if you think this doesn't affect you, like it will economically or whatever. I just want to like shake people and be like, don't you just think everyone deserves the same rights? Like it shouldn't have to impact you economically. It shouldn't have to impact you, which, like I said, I appreciate your appeal to kind of the broader of Ohioans, but it's just, that gets me so bad. Like, how can we not just be at a point where we just think everyone should deserve the same protections?
Absolutely.
We don't have to go into that anymore. I just was listening to you speak on it, and I'm just like, oh, like I hurt for you that like you have to even kind of think about it that way or approach it that way in some regards.
I appreciate it. You're right. Yeah. You are correct.
No, like I said, I appreciate it. I appreciate you doing it. It's just, I'll be ragey over here for you. Okay, let's move on. The origin story here on like how we ended up with 2 ballot initiatives is a little bit interesting. I'll say interesting is maybe the nicest word I can say about it.
I was literally just going to say that's like a nice way to put it.
Yeah. So For those that don't know, this started as a single proposed amendment. So the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment, and the Right to Marry were one amendment, but the Ohio Ballot Board ruled last summer that it actually contained two separate amendments. So how did that decision, when the Ballot Board did that, how did that change your strategy, and what was that internal conversation like within the organization about whether to fight that ruling in court or just to move forward and try to get both sets of signatures?
Yeah, great question. And I will throw out that split was along that decision was along partisan lines, and it was against quite a lot of precedent. So when that, and it involved a lot of language from the ballot board that was clearly meant to split our community and to split specifically the LGBTQ community. And so I think the language coming out of that is very reflective of the language we expect from opposition, which is to one, try to make these two amendments all about trans rights. And it is about trans rights, but it's about everybody's rights. But we know that there's going to be continued efforts to try to narrow what this can do alongside propaganda and misinformation. But we heard that coming out of the ballot board. It's ridiculous to say that marriage equality is not an equal rights issue, which is essentially what the ballot board was saying. They were like, what does this have to do with equal rights?
Oh my God.
Everything?
Wild.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So part of the conversation we were having is how do we make sure that we do not allow our community to be split? And the question of do we fight it in court was actually a little bit more straightforward than the larger question we were faced with, which was, do we move forward with two amendments, or do we just put forth the ERA because it should cover marriage equality when it's in place? And the decision not to fight it in court was strategic. The current Supreme Court is not one that we can guarantee a win. And as I say all the time, we are not here to try our best. We are here to win. I mean, we're going to try our best, but we're here to win. Going to court would have been extremely expensive. It could have dragged out the process for years before we could even start collecting signatures without a guarantee of a win. So we might have been in the same position anyways with needing to pursue two amendments separately. And as much as it is more expensive and it is more technically difficult to run two amendments at the same time, it is more expensive and more time consuming to fight in court. But the conversation about, do we go with just the ERA or do we run two amendments was something that we had a lot of discussion about. And we wanted, even if the part of that decision hinged on the fact that even if knew that the ERA would be enough to cover marriage equality and accomplish what the Right to Marry Amendment would as well, it was important that we made sure that we were keeping the community together and that we were keeping these two issues attached to each other, as well as being cautious about, we really need to make sure that marriage equality is protected. So we want it to be, also something that can, that happens that immediately without having to go to court after the ERA is passed. And in some ways, the right to marry, I think, is a little bit more tangible. The ERA is far more expansive and has the ability to be used in more ways. But I think it's very quick to explain, this is what is in our Constitution now. This is what the right to marry does. So they're strong together. And even if somebody supports one and is a little hesitant about the other, because they are so deeply intertwined and the history is intertwined, it's a good way to open the door to say, hey, you support equality in this way. Let me talk to you about this issue too. And so we've had very few people want to only sign one. Pretty statistically insignificant at this point. Like, they do happen, but most people are very supportive of both. And our signature collectors have been really lovely and patient and have done an amazing job juggling the fact that there's both. We really looked at both, how do we be cautious? How do we make sure everything we want to happen happens? But also we really look to our values around how do we make sure we continue to take our whole community with us? And that involved a town hall. It involved getting feedback from community. So that was weighed in by quite a large spread of people and organizations as well. Which has been a beautiful thing. There's no one person in our campaign who has all the answers. And there's no one organization that has all the answers, but because we are relational grassroots organizers, we don't have to have all the answers. And we've been very lucky to be able to go back to our broader community and say, hey, we want your expertise. And collectively, we can have all the answers we need, right?
Yeah.
So I think that decision was really, really exemplary of the kind of politics I want to be involved in, where we're not looking to one leader or one speaker or one organization, right? But we are looking to our strength in being with each other.
Yeah.
So we really thank everybody who contributed to making that decision and who attended our town hall. We felt really confident about that being the right thing ever since we made the decision.
I really appreciate you walking us through that, because I have, ever since I heard that this has had to be split into 2 amendments, I was just pissed off about it, which yes, we're all pissed off that we have to do double the work. But I just love it. It sounds like you have come to terms with it. And, you and the rest of the organization did everything you could to, lay out all the options, figure out which one made the most sense for, winning this for Ohioans. And so it actually brings me peace to see that you can't dwell on that because you gotta get a lot of signatures,
right.
But it just makes me happy to hear that it sounds like, anger isn't, fully taking over this, which I'm sure it's there, but you know what I mean?
Yeah. No, there's a wide range of emotions all the time.
Yeah. I'm sure.
But yeah, it is, and what I think is what is different about doing this kind of campaign grassroots and from a relational lens rather than, starting with big donors and being able to throw money at every problem we come across, is that we have to really rely on our principles and we have to rely on our community, because that's where we're strong. That community can also be challenging, to be clear. There's anytime you're in a relationship with people, there can be conflict, but there's I think that the movement has developed a lot of trust to be able to weather the fact that we're going to have hiccups like the ballot board decision, right? And there's when our relationships are strong and when we have trust in each other and when we know where our commitment is and we get along with our partners well enough and with each other well enough that it can be a joyful thing to organize together and it can be supportive. It makes a really big difference. As angry and as frustrated as we are and as scared as everybody is, people need places to be powerful. And that's what this movement is offering, right? You don't have to be a big politician. You don't have to have a lot of money. You just have to be willing to go out with a clipboard. And most people are so lovely, right? So there's been really good community. I feel like I've just had so many beautiful friendships come out of just even working with other organizations as well as our teams within OER. And it's easy to lose sight of, how much those relationships matter when you're just looking at the numbers, but it's a very human process that keeps us going and that makes us able to stay in this for the long run. So I'm so grateful for our team at OER, for our coalition members, and all of our volunteers, because they're just the best people.
Oh, I love that so much. And since you've mentioned the numbers, we are going to transition to talk about them a little bit. So you need roughly 413,000 signatures from at least 44 out of the 88 counties in Ohio for each amendment by July 1st. So where does the campaign stand right now? As I mentioned, you can't give us any numbers. That's totally fine. But give us a vibe check. And what does the path to the finish line look like?
Yeah. So, like you said, it's that number stretches across 44 counties. And it's worth mentioning that we actually need 5% of 44 counties, right? So it's not enough to have one person in each county, right? We have to carry a significant population, which is 5% of voters from the last gubernatorial race, not 5% of the population, but a significant portion of voters from at least half of our counties. And we're in kind of constant flux with evaluating the decision on, do we go for 2026? Do we delay? And so what I can talk about is some of the things that we're looking at to make that decision. So, we are looking at polling numbers. Our initial polling when we started the campaign was done at really the height of the 2024 election, which was a wild time to be looking at polling numbers. And, we were quite encouraged actually by what we were seeing given the time that we were collecting that data. But, that decision will be made based on ongoing polling. It's also going to be made based off of what our marketing budget looks like for the Get Out the Vote effort. Because, we, depending on where things are with the polling, we have some room to shift things in a Get Out the Vote effort across a couple of months. So we need the polling to be at a baseline. We feel confident we're going to win. But then we also need to make sure that we have the budget to close any gaps that we still have going to ballot. So for anyone who is asking whether or not they should donate, please do donate, because your donations not only help us collect signatures now, but they help us ensure a win, and they help us ensure that we can fight opposition messaging down the road. So,
we are... there will be plenty of opposition to this, I'm sure.
Yeah, I suspect that there will be strong opposition from a small group of very wealthy people who have access to a lot of tools. On the ground, people are very supportive, and we have endorsements from libertarian candidates and groups, as well as socialist groups as well. We've covered the full spectrum. But yeah, unfortunately, the people we suspect will be opposition have deep pockets. Yes. So, that's one of the things that we are looking at. So we've been acting with a timeline of we want to be on the ballot in 2026, but that final decision is going to be made weighing all of those factors, as well as potentially what happens with the SAVE Act, which is what we won't even there might also be some analysis when we have more information on where that's going, of how long do people need to bounce back and have, to make sure their voter registration is current, especially knowing that most of the people who would be affected directly by the SAVE Act are people who would be supportive of our movement. So, we're still charging ahead until we make a decision. But any effort that we put into signature collecting between now and July 1st will not be wasted. Signatures don't expire unless somebody's details move. So, like I said, we're not just trying our best, we're here to win.
So if you don't submit these petitions in 26 and you guys decide 26 is the better year, all the signatures you have, you get to keep.
Yes.
As long as you don't submit them, right? If you submit them and then you miss, then it's a restart. But if you don't submit and you hold on to them, it's good to go for 27. I didn't realize that. Yep. That's actually incredible.
That's incredible news.
Okay. I love your it's win then. I'm with you. Okay. Yes. I'm understanding.
Yeah, no, it's and maybe I shouldn't talk about this too much publicly, because somebody might figure that out, who wants to attack ballot initiatives. Yeah. But yeah, we could take 10 years to collect signatures. We do not want to do that. That is not the plan. What might shift is, because we have a gubernatorial election in 2026, if we were to wait till 2027, the numbers that we need might shift. But if that happens, if we need higher numbers, we still have another year to get those.
Yeah. Okay, well, we won't put this on a social media clip so the opposition doesn't see it, because I promise they're not listening to our episodes. So
phenomenal. That's right. You just got to bury the really juicy strategy in the middle.
We'll make it to a social media clip, so we'll be fine. Okay. All right, Let's talk about rural Ohio, because you guys have talked about how that's kind of been a really bright spot in signature gathering, and I'm curious to hear more from you. You said that just proportionally rural counties are actually showing up better than urban counties. There's more people involved. It's easier to find signature gatherers. It's easier to find collaborating organizations in some cases. So I guess just curious, what do you think is driving that? Are you guys hearing anything on the ground? And does that change your thinking about a potential November vote or your strategy on Get Out the Vote?
Yeah, really good question. I love talking about our work in rural Ohio. And yeah, it's been amazing. I mean, I'm from a county, I'm from Medina County, which is rural, but doesn't... Oh, hey, nice.
Well, I lived in Medina I just moved out of it 3 years ago. So
Okay, so we were probably there at the same time for a while. And some parts of Medina feel more rural than others, as you well know. But I think I'll start with the little pat on the back kind of aspect of this, which is that, for one thing, I think we've seen such good results in rural counties because we've prioritized rural counties. I think that that's important to note because our politicians love to talk about marginalized people. They love to talk about rural counties and then do nothing for rural counties, right? And it's wild how undifficult it is to reach rural voters if you put in the effort, and I think that's true for people in so many demographics that I hear people all the time in organizations talk about, how difficult it is to reach XYZ population. But when you treat people with respect and you're offering them something of value and you're approaching them as partners, it's often really not that difficult to find that partnership. And so it's a little pat on the back, but more of a everybody could do better. it's not that hard. But one of the things that I think is really, really driven some of that support in rural areas too is that a lot of people in rural communities know each other, right? They're already really modeling well relational organizing because people know who they are and they know their neighbors, and they know who they can go out and ask. But also a lot of people who are affected by the kind of policy that we are pushing more and more live in rural areas. And if you're a minoritized person in a rural area, you feel all of these issues more, right? If you don't have a variety of doctors to choose from because your community doesn't have a lot of hospital infrastructure, you have far less options when you encounter discrimination or a barrier to go to. You can't just find somebody else nearly as easy as you can in urban areas. A lot of our rural communities are healthcare deserts, especially when you talk about maternal care. We have so many rural counties that just don't have a maternity ward, to the point, and I'm not quite as articulate as Liz is on these statistics, where in terms of the dangers of giving birth in Ohio, we know that the populations who are at most risk of death or of lasting complications to their health from the pregnancy and birth process are Black birthing parents and rural birthing parents. So these gaps in services show up in the health of anybody who gives birth or loves somebody who gives birth. Yeah. They really show up a lot in people's real life. It's not just numbers on a page. And we also know that rural communities have been really hit particularly hard by the opioid epidemic, right? Our includes recovery status to protect people who have experienced addiction from discrimination because they're in recovery. So there's a lot of issues that show up, especially in rural areas, that haven't been well addressed and that are really the result of neglect in policy. So I think people in rural areas are looking at these amendments and saying, yes, this is something that I see myself in, but also something that I can actually influence, right? And actually bring it into reality. So yeah, they've been wonderful. It's really been encouraging in terms of how we look at strategy. Because when we're looking at meeting the 44 counties where we get 5%, numerically speaking, we have to get less signatures to hit 5% in a rural county compared to an urban county. A lot of the bulk of numbers will always come from urban areas because they have the bulk in numbers and population, right? But really making sure that we are going out to rural counties is actually very helpful for us in terms of meeting those requirements to get on the ballot. And so we'll be at quite a few rural county prides this summer. Folks want to look out for us. We're about to launch a fundraising campaign specifically to increase the amount of supplies that we have and our resources for signature gatherers at rural prides so that we can go to as many as possible and really get out and really get in contact with folks who might not otherwise hear a lot from ballot initiatives.
Mm-hmm.
So again, if anybody wants to donate, please help us support our rural communities. In terms of the cost, we have some of our smaller and population small, I mean, some of our smaller population counties, it only takes $150 to sponsor printing all of the petitions for our necessary signatures in that county. So it's, if someone is really looking to make a big impact, $150 can cover our costs for an entire county for printing. So, yeah.
That's amazing. That's really not that much when it comes to getting folks to donate.
Yeah. And it's actually amazing.
Yeah. And I just love so much that y'all aren't counting rural Ohio out. I mean, technically you can't because you need 44 of the 88 signatures, or 88 counties. But Ashley and I are big believers that, I mean, it's just evident that politicians continuously leave rural areas behind. And we live in Ohio. We got quite a bit of that going on. So
yes,
it's incredible to hear that y'all are also having so much success with those areas, and it just makes me happy. It actually kind of restores my faith in humanity a bit. So
good. Yeah. And I think people forget that there are marginalized people, not just like marginalized because they're in a rural county, but there's diversity in rural areas too, right? Like we tend to look at, I think the dominant narrative about rural areas is that it looks like a few very specific demographics, right? And that is true less and less. And I say that as, I'm like in that I love when sometimes I hear really anti-rights politicians talk about like the lesbian farmers taking over the Midwest because I'm a farmer. I'm a queer farmer in the Midwest.
I haven't heard this right-wing conspiracy theory. Can you please elaborate?
Oh my God. It was a couple years ago and I wish I remembered it better, but I have to look it up to figure out who really started it. But some politician got up on stage and was talking about how the lesbians are taking over the Midwest. And I was like, what a great idea.
Honestly, yeah.
Yeah. Can we make that happen?
Okay. Yeah. So you're talking like small, like ecological food production, because what else are we going to do? Right. Like food security for all and gay marriage. Yes.
Right.
But yeah, like we're people who are not white and not cis and heterosexual, or who are still really in touch with their culture from outside of the US, like are often really invisibilized in rural areas. And some of that is because people can be rightfully afraid to stick out. It's hard to be one of a handful of anyone, especially, until the point that your neighbor. And I think one of the things about the ballot initiative process that I'm really grateful for is what we're pushing is, I think, really palatable and really opens the door for people to connect and for people to participate in the political process in a way that is actually fairly safe. Mm-hmm. Relatively speaking, right? Yeah. It's a good way to build connection, to know your neighbors, and to invite people in to a conversation where you might learn that they are more friendly than you would have thought. And that's been the experience of some of our signature collectors. So yeah, we're always like, we'll get messages all the time about someone who's like, there's really, this really kind of locked in area that everyone thinks is just overwhelmingly conservative, just had a coffee shop that offered to let us collect every week, right? So we find those connections, and it's made visible how much support there is within all of our communities.
That's incredible. That seriously makes me so happy, especially for this campaign in particular. So we are, I literally just did the math in my head, less than 3 months away from July 1st, which is wild. And that is the almighty deadline for all of these signatures. So if I was a listener, listening to this episode, really excited to hear what you have to say and to hear about these 2 amendments, and I want to get involved collecting signatures, how can that person do that?
Great question. So if you go to ohioequalrights.org, which is our website, I think we're big enough now that we show up pretty high on the Google list, so it's not too hard to find. But ohioequalrights.org, as long as you get Ohio Equal Rights, it'll show up. Can go to our website, is several shades of beautiful purple, and then you can hover over the Get Involved tab, and then that first option on that drop-down list is volunteer. So if you click volunteer, you fill out your information. We're going to ask you what county you live in for your contact information. We're also going to ask you about what skills you want to bring to the campaign. So if you are a phenomenal socialite and you love to go out and work a crowd, we're probably going to ask you to go out and collect signatures. But if you want to be behind the scenes and you have some artistic or some writing skills, or, you know, if you love managing spreadsheets, we have a place for you. To be clear, we want people who love data too. If you love all of those things, we might ask you to pick one or two, but yeah, so, you know, you can go in and select the kind of volunteer roles you're interested in. And then, especially for some of those behind the scenes opportunities, one of our committee chairs will get a hold of you to invite you in to get involved there. But for signature gathering, you'll get access to a list with your county captain or your local petition captain's information. We are about to launch, and I think by the time this episode airs, we will have launched our new volunteer portal. So automatically you will see options to watch a recorded orientation video as well as a recorded signature collection training. If this episode comes out before we've launched our new portal, you'll get an email with those materials. You'll get an email either way. As long as you check your email, check your spam, you'll find it. If you prefer to have a live signature gathering training, we do also have those available. So you just need to check on the next one that you can come to. Email our volunteer coordinator. You can also request an in-person signature gathering training, especially if you have a group that wants to go out and collect signatures. So we will come to you if you have a group, and then you get to hang out with us in person.
Fun. Okay, I'm going to try to just summarize real quick. So we know that we have 2 amendments that your organization is actively collecting signatures for. Those signatures are due by July 1st if the goal is to get the amendment on the ballot this November. If enough signatures are gathered and the issues make it to the ballot in November, we will all obviously be voting for them and supporting them. In like a 1 or 2 liner, could you kind of give folks listening before we officially wrap just like a high level, like what changes for Ohioans the day after these pass in November?
Absolutely. So there will be a period where we're waiting for them to come into effect. But the day after, we know that we're on a pathway to having, you know, it'll just be a matter of time before gay marriage is protected in the Constitution. But as soon as the ERA goes into effect, we will have a framework that we have never had in Ohio to hold our politicians accountable on the state and local level. You know, so essentially what the ERA is doing is creating a policy framework to challenge and stop discriminatory policies. And so the day after, I'm going to say we're probably all going to take a nap, and then 2 days after.
I was going to say drink a beer. And a celebratory drink. Yes.
Yes. Almost immediately, we are going to have the ability to pursue in court challenges to discriminatory laws. And so we're already talking to our coalition members about where do we want to prioritize when we have this tool, what policies are we going to go after first? And that could, you know, some of the options that we've discussed involve following in Nevada's footsteps in making sure that state Medicaid funding isn't restricted for reproductive health care. Currently, you cannot use Medicaid funding to access abortion, which is a huge access issue for people who are lower income, right? We have several laws on the books that criminalize having HIV and are really, really antiquated and unscientific and put people with HIV and people in their communities at risk needlessly, as well as, anti-trans bans. There is a huge array of laws that very obviously discriminate based off of race, but don't say the word race. That is like the so many. And so, that's also looking at how do we start to build legal arguments around de facto discrimination in policy, even when it doesn't name specifically who the policy is very clearly targeting. So passing the amendments is just the beginning, because then we have this tool to use in courts. And we hope that our legislators will not waste the state's time and money passing laws that will immediately get struck down. We can't guarantee that, but looking back even to pre-Dobbs, when we were fighting heartbeat bills in Ohio, former Governor Kasich vetoed anti-choice legislation several times because he knew it was going to lose in court, right? So there is also a preventative aspect. The actual mechanism that this creates is we can challenge policies in court, but there is also a deterrence aspect as well.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
I love that.
Yeah, we've never had this framework, and we have a lot of discriminatory laws.
Yes, this legislature, yes, the Ohio GOP has had control of the legislature for decades, and there's been a lot of harm done. So yeah, it would be a very powerful tool.
I'm really hoping that we prioritize with our coalition, right? Is even like back in 2013, when the federal Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in Shelby County versus Holder, Ohio was one of 29 states that passed restrictive voting laws, right? That we know disproportionately target people of color. And so even we're dealing with so much manipulation of our ability to vote federally as well as in Ohio. So that is another priority area, is then using this ERA to affect our voting rights as well.
Yeah. I love that there's already strategy on when it's in place, how to use it effectively. It's amazing.
Yeah. We're always scheming.
Always scheming. That's the new tagline for this. Ohio Equal Rights, always scheming.
Yes.
Just one last logistical question. If folks are also interested in looking for where maybe the Ohio Equal Rights will be tabling, or where they can sign a petition, can they also find that on the website?
Yes. Thank you so much for asking this. So on our website, we have an event tracker. So if you hover over the events bit on the top of our webpage, you'll find a selection that says sign the petitions. If you click that, it'll take you to our events tracker. So you can look for events in your county or in neighboring counties. You can sort either by county or region and find a place where we know our volunteers have signed up to table. And if you have an event that you would like us to collect signatures at, you can email us, but you can also actually, again, go to events and then go to suggest an event, and we will see if our volunteers are available to come out.
We will include all those. Well, we'll include the link to the Ohio Equal Rights website, but we're also going to include links to the specific volunteer page, links to the sign the petition page. So there will be no question on where to find all of this amazing information. We'll include all of that in the show notes.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, Liz, just want to say thank you for coming on, taking the time that you spent with us tonight to share with everyone listening, but also all the work you and the organization and all the volunteers are doing. Like I said, it would be so nice for Ohio to be the gold standard, and you guys have put in the hard work to do that. So we hope we can help push it across the finish line here.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much. This has been really wonderful to meet both of you. And thank you both for all the work that you guys are doing. Happy to have you as part of the movement. So
Aww.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for everything you and Ohio Equal Rights do.